Okay, so, yeah. All right, game studies, you all know you're in the right place. That's fine. If you hadn't worked it out already by all the talk about bears. Okay, so, welcome to week 2. I fixed that. Whatever. Okay, so first things first. So from this week on, at least until probably later in the semester when you guys are busy with work, I've got there's going to be readings every week. So I've put up the week 2 readings. Yeah. So yeah, go have a look there on Blackboard. Again, it's a PDF link, so let me know if it doesn't work because the course outline had issues which I couldn't see on my end. So if you try it and it doesn't work, maybe someone actually could give it a go during this and just let me know sort of at the end. But yeah, there's 2. So there's an excerpt on prototyping from Jesse Shell's book. A Book of Lenses, which you guys have probably all sort of familiar with if you're game students. Yeah, and then there's another one which is a pharmaceutical article about prototyping a game in sort of a short period of time. I think it's 7 days. Yes, 7 days. How to prototype a game in under 7 days. There you go, under 7 days. So that's sort of that. So just keep an eye on there. Updates will go up. I'll let you guys know each week anyway. So mostly because it's an excuse to have more pictures of dogs reading books. Okay, so the next couple of lectures, so this is sort of part 1 of a two-part sort of thing, is going to be about designing research, right? So you remember this slide from last week. I really want you guys to think about the word designing, right? It's not that much different from developing like a game document or something like that. You need to sort of plan ahead for each aspect of it, sort of plan out what you're going to do ahead of time and really think about sort of all the aspects of it. So I'm going to start by just revisiting this slide from last week and sort of break down quantitative and qualitative a little bit further. So these are sort of the two major schools of research methods. I'll probably bounce between using the words method and methodologies. They're basically interchangeable. Methodologies is sort of just a more academically accurate word, but it's basically just any sort of practice, way of doing research. So I'm going to start with quantitative. We're going to focus a lot on qualitative early on, but this is sort of the easier one to initially define. And that, so quantitative is anything you can quantify, right? So numbers, statistics, which I guess are the same thing, really. But, like hard data. So in a game, that would be something like telemetry. So you guys, anyone completely not come across telemetry before? Yeah? So basically, telemetry is a way of collecting any data during the game, right? So this example is from Assassin's Creed. I think it's the 3rd or 4th one, I'm not sure, it doesn't really matter. And can you guys see the colors sort of all right on the screens? Maybe, yeah. So each sort of line is like the route that the player has taken, right? So this is a map of all the movement of a bunch of players while playing the game, the whole length of the game. Each individual color is the route that they've taken during sort of a main quest line. So they're using this to sort of see, okay, how much of the map are we utilizing, or in sort of black spots like that that people aren't visiting? Are they sort of, seeing as much of the map as we want them to? And Assassin's Creed is really interesting. When we do telemetry sort of later on, I'll show you some other stuff, but they collect just insane amounts of player information. So yeah, it's really cool. And actually, most games do some level of this. And have for quite some time, especially now that most games connect online. It's very easy to collect this data, bounce it back to you, and you get all of that information. So you can see how people are using the maps, but it can also be things like just like kill counts, when the player jumps, stuff like that. So basically, any action that the player can do, you take a note of it. That's telemetry, right? Yeah. You'll also probably come across demographic data, and this is probably the most relevant to you guys, sort of the stuff we're talking about at the moment, because you'll be sort of looking at demographics in your assignments a little bit. And that's just basically broad sets of information which give broad sets of data that give you generalized information about a group, right? So, age ranges, genders, whatever. I mean, demographics is sort of fairly straightforward. We can break it down in this class, right? So, okay, how many of you are sort of between 18 and 20? How many of you are male or female or other or whatever? So it just gives you sort of really broad information. And you usually use this to support other information, right? So you can then go, okay, so 25-year-old females are giving us this response consistently, whereas 30-year-old males are giving us this other response. So it's a good tool for sort of cross-referencing in a way. And then, yeah, there's statistical data, so things like maybe economic data or kill counts or stuff like that. If you guys have seen sports at all, which would be pretty difficult to get to sort of your stage in life and have never seen sports, right? Has anybody never seen sports? No? Cool. I saw a hand go up, but that's fine. So basically, yeah, right? Like you're just tracking data and then, using statistical analysis. That's sort of not super useful to you guys at this point. But if you're collecting, data and statistics and stuff like that, that's a good thing, right? And we'll go over a little bit on how to look at that later in the course as we get towards the sort of the end, when you guys will be able to implement that in your major assignments, your major group assignment. So don't be afraid of like sort of capturing data like that, because we're going to touch it. It's very easy to collect that sort of stuff, so it's worth having. And then the other type of sort of quantifiable data is like replicable scientific experiments and analysis, right? So chemistry, medical stuff. So yeah, this is a DNA sequence, which you can repeat that experiment and do it over and over again, and you have an actual like physical piece of data that you can go back to. This isn't going to be really relevant to what you guys are doing, unless any of you are getting into like hardcore gene sequencing for some reason as part of your major assignment. No? Okay, cool. No one's considering that. Yeah. The coolest thing about this is just sort of a side note, but I was actually lucky enough a few years ago to visit a gene sequencing lab as part of a project I was working on. That's straight up a photo. They put the DNA like into this sort of like gel plate, and they put it under a neon thing, and it lights up exactly like that. It's super cool. All right, so basically, yeah, dealing with quantifiable data, right? It's any sort of solid, rigid, sortable data, which can be sort of used to easily identify areas of interest. So you'll often hear about hard science, sort of hard science versus soft science. This is hard science stuff, right? The sort of limitation of that being that it's not really good at telling you why something's happening. It'll typically only be able to tell you that something is happening, right? So, think about, say, the classic sort of global warming charts, right? You can see, okay, the planet's getting hotter, but then you have to sort of go from there and figure out, okay, why is this happening, right? So it'll give you a piece of information and not show why. And often, especially when you're doing game design, right, like that's sort of your most important question, which is why we tend to focus on qualitative data. So ethnography, which this course is fairly ethnographic heavy, falls into the realm of qualitative research pretty firmly. So yeah, where quantitative research is like numbers, stats, so on and so forth, right? Quantifiable, I've got a mistake in my notes here, sorry. Yeah, qualitative research, is stuff like interviews, behavior, observation, stuff that isn't easily sortable, relies on interpretation. Yeah, and that's often why it's sort of called soft sciences, right? Where if you think of like hard science, right, you've got this like hard data that you can look at, and I mean that's not to imply that hard data isn't open to interpretation. It absolutely is. But soft science, like qualitative information, is things that you can't quantify, and that's why you do interviews. I'm muddling through this. I'm sorry. I'm quite distracted today. So yeah, the sort of primary methods fall into like generally two groups, which is oversimplifying a little bit, but as we go through, we'll sort of build on these sort of two core ideas. So the first of those is observation, right? We played around a little bit with that last week. It's often you'll do really long-term observation. So we're not going to do that probably as part of this, but when you're doing, say, a sociological study, you'll do it sometimes for years at a time, do an observational study. And, often it's embedded as well, so you'll be right in there with the people doing it. The other major form is interviews. And I'm sort of grouping things like surveys and focus groups and stuff under that sort of heading. But they're all variations on a similar thing, right? You ask somebody a question, you get a response. There's one note that I haven't made here about surveys, which is surveys can drift between quantifiable and qualitative data. So if you think of a survey, say, with just broad questions like what is your age, whatever like that, right? That's quantifiable data. If you've seen one with a Likert scale, which we'll go through when we do surveys, but that's basically the 5-point one where it's like strongly agree, strongly disagree. That's quantifiable. If you have one where it asks you to type in an answer, that would be a qualitative response. So that's sort of where to think of it. Some people tend to go, oh yeah, I'm going to do this qualitative survey, and then all of them are like input responses, and that's wrong. So just keep that in mind. But basically, if it's like sort of numbers or stuff you can put in a list and do stats, that's quantitative. But yeah, the reason you do interviews is to get responses and data in the subject's own words. Actually hear from them. So yeah, by its very nature, qualitative data can't be easily quantified. It's great for understanding sort of behaviors and motivations. People don't fit into a nice little box where you can go, they will 100% of the time do X. It just doesn't work that way. The downside to that is because it's sort of like very amorphous in nature, it's open to interpretation, a lot more than hard data is. We'll sort of go through some strategies next week for dealing with that. But yeah, it's really susceptible to things like bias on the part of the researcher. And there's just any number of things that can sort of throw in the works. So we've got most of the lecture next week will be focused actually on dealing with those issues and making sure that you get sort of the most reliable qualitative data that you can. So the final thing is there's often the best approach is to take a mix of those two together. So a lot of the time now you won't find like a social study or something that doesn't have some kind of quantifiable data in it. So we call that mixed methods. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that GIF. Which is basically you use quantifiable and qualitative data to balance out the weaknesses of each aspect of it, right? So yeah, just like anything else, you use the strengths of each and cover your bases that way. Okay, so are there any questions at that point? No? No questions? No? Okay, so I'm just gonna have a quick breath. Wait, there we go. I'm recording the lecture this time, and it's kind of throwing out some of my timing on the lectures, on the slides. I mean, so yeah. Okay, so with sort of that in mind, and that's something you just want to keep in mind in the back of your mind the whole time, right? So the next step is planning your research. So this is sort of what you'll be doing for assignment 1, right? You're writing a research plan. I'm going to teach you guys sort of like a simplified version of it with sort of 4 major elements. Typically, if you were going to do something like a PhD or a master's or something, there's more elements that you need to include. So this is like, yeah, the basic quick undergrad version where you don't have to worry about things like, say, like ethics approval from an ethics committee or stuff like that. Yeah, so the first thing you want to do is figure out your research question. And oftentimes you'll have a bunch of research questions. That's fine. You want to know, like, who is it you want to find out about? What is it you want to know about them? And then oftentimes, like, what is it you don't already know? What is it you assume that you know? Write down as many of these questions as you can, right? Like, just sit down, first step, write down all this stuff. Yeah, and this is also the stage where you want to do sort of like your literature review in a sense. Have you guys done a literature review before? A couple of you? That's basically where you look at research that's already been done and go, okay, so this is what they have. So you might find that somebody has already answered some of the questions that you have. If you're dealing with your own game design, obviously that might not be the case. It will be pretty tricky for someone to answer questions about your game. But there might be research out there about sort of the demographic information that you're looking for. As an example, one of the students, the first year I taught this, did a game for people with anxiety to help calm them down. And she looked at basically a lot of color theory involved in that and what helps there, right? So there's all that clinical information that she was able to look at, which helped her develop sort of the color palette for her game. And she based that on information that people have found by doing color research with people who suffer anxiety. So this is sort of the stage where you want to start looking at that. But, generally you want to keep sort of, looking at the outside material as well. Don't just, go straight forward and go, I'm going to research like all of Japanese culture. It's like, no, research this tiny little bit of Japanese culture. Tons of people have written about Japanese culture before. You can find the answer. It's out there. Yeah. And then step 2 is working out your methodology for answering those questions. Right? So you've got a handful of questions. It's good to sort of order them in sort of by importance, essentially. So here's your main question, and then maybe there's some sub-questions there. The next step is to figure out how you're going to investigate those questions. What tools are you going to use? And that's where the methodologies come in, right? So, is the best way to do an interview with somebody? Do you just need to collect some data about who they are? Do you just need demographic information or something like that? This is also a really good stage to sort of start to scope what you're doing with research, right? You don't want to go and say, yeah, we're going to get 4,000 responses to our survey. Like, that's 4,000 responses you then have to sort through. And yeah, we had one group that did that last year, and I was like, you are insane. Like, 400 is enough for like a PhD study, right? You guys, 100 is probably good for what you're doing. 100 is actually great. But they have 4,000 like written responses in a survey. It was like, how long did that take you to read? If each person wrote 100 words, that's like, 400,000 words. That's longer than War and Peace. So, plan out how much you can realistically get done at this stage as well. And then, yeah, and then just work out which methods you're going to use. Also, sort of work out the weaknesses of what methodology you're using and see if you can balance that out in another way, maybe by using a second method that sort of props it up. Okay, the next major step is to figure out sort of what influencing factors exist that will change sort of your data collection, right? So big part of that is sort of the ethics of the situation, your own personal biases. That's what we're going over next week, like I said earlier. But it can also include elements such as the environment, relationship between participants, your relationship to the participants, all sorts of stuff, right? Like there's any number of things that can influence the result. So at this point, you want to plan as much as you can for those, and then try and limit those influencing factors so you can get the most basically clean data that you can get. That's sort of, if you think of what we did with the in the tutes, right? With sort of Nidhogg, where some of you guys, when you were playing it, were almost like performing for the group, right? That's something that is going to heavily influence the kind of information you get. So you want to try and limit those factors. So 2 and 3 sort of blend together a little bit. Just putting it out because this is actually a really important stage. In a sense, maybe the most important stage because it's really going to give you the best information. If you're getting, it's like, garbage in, garbage out. If you're getting garbage information come in, it's not of any use to you. Like your responses are going to be, like your conclusions are going to be sort of wrong or, are much more likely to be wrong. And then step 4 is, I don't know what's going on with my animation. Okay, so step 4 is analysis. And this is where you plan out how you're going to analyze all of the data that you collect. So if you have a bunch of demographic data, what are you going to do with that? If you have a bunch of interview responses, are you going to transcribe them? How are you going to figure out basically what the key information you want from those interviews is? If you have observational data, what sort of behavior are you looking for? All of that stuff. You can never sort of plan fully for this unless you're dealing with quantifiable data, right? But with qualitative data, there's always going to be sort of outliers, basically. You're always going to have an idea, though, of what you're expecting. And it's never going to be like super crazy out there, especially with games, right? You sort of can predict reasonably what sort of responses you'll get. So, this is a stage where you want to plan for that. We'll be looking at data analysis in more depth later on, right? So again, this is just break down each sort of stage of what we're doing for the research plan. But basically, having a plan for this, instead of just getting all of this data and then going, okay, what do I do with it now? If you plan ahead of time, it's going to save you so much pain later on, because you can do things like decide, okay, I need this many responses to prove my result, right? I don't need 4,000, I need 100. So you sort of figure out how much you need to actually answer your question, and then how you're going to make your conclusion from that information. Okay, so that's sort of the main steps of the research plan. So it makes it a lot easier to manage if you plan ahead, right? If you do this sort of process for your major assignment, you're basically just writing yourself like a design brief, right? And then you just go and do it. You don't have to think too much about it, right? You sort of front load all that hard work. If you don't have a plan, you just kind of muddle through it, right? It's like trying to build IKEA furniture without the thingy that they write how to build the IKEA furniture on, manual or the instruction booklet or whatever it's called. When you guys are writing your assignment, consider sort of breaking it down into subheadings like this. You probably want to even break it down a little bit further. like sort of here's just my introduction and question, here's my review of what's out there, then influencing factors, methodology, and all of that. It's also really useful, and this isn't required for assignment 1, but it's also really useful to make a timeline for yourself. So when you're doing assignment 2, when you're planning that, put a timeline together. Actually, think of how much time is it going to take you to do each stage. Like interviews, it may take you an afternoon. It'll probably take you more like 3 weeks because you have to, organize a certain amount of people. You have to find time to deal with them. Then, it might take you 3 more weeks to go through the data from those interviews, right? You'll probably want to transcribe them. You'll have recordings and stuff that you need to listen back to. So yeah, make sure to really plan out how much you've got. Once we've got the groups set up, we'll organize for what weeks after the break you guys are going to present in. So you guys will know sort of what stage you're going to present the work in. The presentations are more of a sort of here's our progress. So you don't need to have anything like super finished at that point. But yeah, it'll just help you guys sort of plan ahead for that. And then yeah, the end of semester is when that stuff's due, right? So you've got about, from now, sort of 10, 11 weeks, I think it is. Oh, I guess it's more like 13 because we've got the break as well. Yeah, so really parcel out that time, and yeah, that'll help you scope as well. Scope is really important. You don't want to overscope this stuff because you just wind up with too much shit to deal with. You'll get totally overwhelmed by information very quickly. So yeah, just to recap, this is sort of what you'll be doing for assignment 1. It's about 1,000 words, so it's not super long. It's only a few pages tops. I think it's like 2 pages really. So it's not very much, right? And it's individual work, so you can sort of take this forward into your group work, but yeah. So each of you needs to come up with your own research plan for this part. Yeah, that's basically because I need to have a written assignment for this course. So I've tried to sort of make it as useful to the major assignment as possible. So you might find that you've written it, and I'm not sure how long it'll take me to grade everyone. There's about 80 of you. So that'll probably take me a few weeks to actually get all the feedback and grades and everything done. But it'll at least give you an idea of sort of what you might want to do for your major assignment with the group. Okay, so are there any questions about that or about the assignment in general? No? So yep. Sorry, I can't hear you very well. Okay, so that was, if you guys didn't hear, do you decide what game you're making first and then research from there? You can do that. For this assignment, I would actually recommend that you choose a target audience or a person first and design to that rather than going the other way around. Yeah, there's nothing to say that if you have say a game studio project or something, and you want to work from there, you can. It's harder to do it that way, honestly. Yeah, it's just a research plan for assignment 1. So you don't you don't need to do anything in there, right? You can completely hypothetical it. Yeah, just make sure you sort of understand what techniques you're going to talk about. We had a really weird schedule last year, and some people sort of tried to put in techniques they didn't understand. Don't get super fancy with it. Just make a really short, basic research plan. Yeah, but it can be, maybe somebody you don't have access to or something like that. It can be hypothetical. Assignment 2, the major assignment where you actually have to carry out the research, obviously at that point you need to plan around the actual logistics of sort of access to the people that you're going to be looking into and stuff like that. And that also includes things like a bunch of people are like, yeah, we're going to go to a school and do our research. And I'm like, no, you're not. Yeah, so just, I mean, if any of you start doing like a major assignment and I don't think that you guys are going to be able to get it done in terms of like who you want to research, I will tell you. So yeah, just, yeah, for assignment 1, don't worry about it. Just write whatever sort of plan you come up with. It's more about putting together those stages and actually demonstrating sort of an understanding and an ability to think about the methods and how they'll be used. Yeah. So any other questions? Yo.
With that in mind, who is actually a good group to research in terms of the ease of use of getting data?
Okay, so that was, for you guys who couldn't hear, I'm also repeating the question for the recording as well. So it feels really weird to just parrot back what you've just said to me. But that was basically sort of what's a good group to research. And basically, like any group that's sort of sufficiently different to yourself is good because it A, leads to more interesting questions, and B, it means you sort of have less like biases going in, or at least it's easier to identify your biases going into that research. As for access, I would say sort of generally, it's sort of a tricky one. People have like done kids and sort of elderly people and things like that, and that's worked quite well. They've also done sort of people who are overseas and use stuff like Skype and that to work with. It's just a case of like you'll know better than I like what sort of groups you can get access to. When it comes to things like school, right, then there's like layers of like, well, first of all, you need to convince a principal to let you in and, interview the kids, and that's just straight not going to happen, right? So it's sort of things like that it becomes a problem. Yeah. So that example from last year, right? They're like, oh yeah, I'll go to my little sister's school and talk to the students there, and it was just like, you can't just do that. If you go to a school and start asking a bunch of little kids questions, they're going to call the fucking police. So yeah, that's sort of the main thing I try to avoid, right? The only other real sort of issues with that are, say, people who would be considered sort of like high-risk groups. So when we do like a major like actual research project, right, we have to actually submit to an ethics committee who, like, before you can do anything, before you can even talk to people about potentially doing an interview with them, like you need to go to an ethics committee, and they'll approve it. And there's sort of like what they consider high-risk groups, right? So that would be Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders, trans people, refugees, sort of groups that are like typically marginalized or at risk of harm somehow from the process. And you might not even think like, oh, I'm just going to ask them about games. It's fine. But then there's also, you need to, well, basically plan ahead for that and go like, yeah, but you could also say something that's actually damaging to the person you're studying and that without even realizing it, right? So like, I guess an example would be like, oh, we're going to interview people from China about their views of the government. Something like that, right? And it's like, maybe don't. Unless you can like absolutely ensure that information isn't going to get out somehow, because that could come back to, that could actually come back and bite them. So it's concerns like that maybe aren't like, absolutely going to happen, but you need to take into account that could happen. So yeah, like if any of you, like I don't think anybody's going to do that. But yeah, it's just because I'm obviously responsible for you as a group, I need to make sure that nobody's going to get somebody killed or get arrested, that sort of thing. I would recommend that to not do like close family members. So for basically the same reason I said before of like, you don't want to do people who are, you want to do people who are quite different to you. close family members tend to just not be very interesting to research, and you wind up with a crappier project because you haven't had an interesting person to study in the beginning, because you already know them quite well. So it's not not a very rich area for asking a lot of questions about them. You'll sort of just bring your assumed knowledge to it. So yeah, I'd recommend against family members. Maybe if it's like a grandparent or something that you're not like living with, that's sort of different story. But yeah, try and challenge yourself a little bit with who you're going to pick, because you'll probably have more fun doing it and it'll be much more interesting, but you'll also get a better assignment out of it, just because it's going to give you more to work with. Okay, are there any other questions? Concerns? Yeah?
Are there any ethical concerns we need to keep in mind if we're trying to interview minders that have permission, but it's still...
Yeah, so the general rule is get permission from the parents. We'll cover things like consent and ethics and bias next week, and I'll go into sort of a fair bit of detail on that. So yeah, I'm not saying don't interview kids at all. I'm just saying don't think that you're going to be able to just go to a school and talk to them during the day. That's just not going to happen. They're not going to let you go do that. So yeah, keep in mind, who you actually can get access to. If it's, maybe you need to do a couple of interviews, right? Maybe you can do that over Skype. Yeah. Anything else? Yo.
So I know this assignment is individual, but how does it relate to the future group assignments? Should we be trying to organize individually doing the same research questions as the people that are in our groups, or is it just...
Okay, so that was, should you be sort of trying to make assignment one and all do the same research one? You can. There's nothing, I don't have any problem with you guys doing that. But yeah, assignment one doesn't have to transfer over to assignment two, right? Assignment one can be totally hypothetical. You could be wanting to research, my mind immediately went to Somalian refugees or something. Don't do that. You're going to have to write more than 1,000 words just in ethics alone. But you can be totally hypothetical with it. The assignment will it's more the process of assignment one that you'll be doing again in assignment two. So it can save you a little bit of work if you guys are a group, sort of each do what you might do for assignment two. Then you can sort of you have notes and it gives you a bit to go with. Yeah. So yeah, there's nothing, you can totally do it that way if you want, but you don't have to. It doesn't have to tie into assignment two at all. So just do something that you feel comfortable doing, and feel like you can manage for assignment one. I don't expect that it's going to be amazing because you guys are doing this sort of mid-semester, right? You don't have all of the knowledge available to you, but yeah, that's why it's sort of, the written assignment isn't tied into major assignment, because then you write your research plan sort of week 2 or something, and then you get changed to that for the rest of the semester, and it could be a total disaster. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
When it comes to executing the research plan in assignment 2,
Yep.
does all the data that you collect, does it all have to be from us, or is it resource
Okay, so that was...
Will you be marking us on how much data?
Yeah, okay, so that was for assignment 2, how much data do you have to collect versus how much can you get from online? You do have to collect some of your own data, so do interviews or observation studies and stuff like that, because actually doing that is part of the assessment. But it's also totally cool if some of that information is out there online, right? Just save yourself the time and use that information. You just need to, when you use it, make sure that you write down basically why you're using it and why it's a good source. So yeah, think critically about what you're doing. Don't take anything at face value. It's usually good to, if you're saying collecting something like economic data, get 2 or 3 sources that sort of corroborate each other. And yeah, basically like do a review of that piece of information. Yeah. Cool. So can I give you an example? I probably can, but we're running out of time, so I might save that for the tutes during the week, if that's okay. Yeah. I will we'll grab something. I don't have a good example of a written assignment because it's actually a little bit different from last year. So I don't want to give you guys something that's not the same assignment, basically, and lead you guys astray. So yeah, okay. Anything else? No? Okay. So, all right. So for next week, I want you guys to think about a question, and I'm going to make you guys answer it this time. So who do you make games for? Or who do you want to make games for? Yeah, have a think about that. We'll talk about it during the tute. But yeah, so the last thing that we're going to do is just register groups. So I'm just going to hit stop on this record real quick. Goodbye, people watching the recording.